Hello, Mhotep, and welcome to the latest transmission of the Egyptian Magick podcast. I'm Mogg Morgan, companion of Seth and Knight of Shambhala. Please do leave feedback or queries either here or by finding me on the usual social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, etc. And check out my several books on Egyptian magic and its connections, which are heavily illustrated and often have images and some of the sources that crop up in my chats, and some of the stuff is dealt with in more detail. Okay, so last time I talked about the kind of struggle, if you like, that I'll put it in the way. I talked about this thing that Crowley said. Here's a quote from him. I was in a death struggle with self. God and Satan fought for my soul those 3 long hours. God conquered. Now I have only one doubt left. Which of the twain was God? And that's from Aleister Crowley. If you're interested, Al-Qadima, A Place to Bury Strangers in. Preface. It was a rather strange sounding book. But a famous quote talking about the kind of internal struggle that takes place often in adolescence, but at any time in your life really, in which one deals with these issues. And for magicians, I think I talked last time how it might be a common kind of idea really, or uncommon we should say, in which this struggle between good and evil, if you like, within yourself or within 2 different angels kind of leads to a journey, as a beginning of a journey through magic, which led me, as I said, to a particular tradition, which is the Typhonian tradition and the Sethian tradition as part of Egyptian magic. Anyway, to continue with that, I wanted to talk about the stage I got to at, which was put together, or if you like, manifest in terms of a book I wrote a long time ago called Sexual Magick, which includes the secrets of the sexual gnosis in the Western magic. And I wrote that under a kind of, I suppose you'd say, a pseudonym, Katon Shual, which was it was my magical name on initiation into the Typhonian order in the end, as a result of the meditations that one is led into in order to join that group. I think there was a moment in which this name came up. Really, it's actually probably a little bit garbled, but I don't use the name very much these days. But the book is still there. I suppose it's rather a glamorous or maybe overblown title in a way, especially, it's like the first book one writes on magic, which as I say, writing a book for magicians is almost like, it's what you do with your diary really. You have to write these journals and diaries, and it's not always clear after a while what you're supposed to do with that, but in a way you bring it all together into the form of a book. It's like a confession or a summary of where you feel you are at that point in the journey. So this was written quite a long time ago, but it was the first thing that I wrote while I was actually in the Typhonian OTO, or not long after I'd been into that. I think I was still just doing the first or second degree. And even then, the interesting thing back then, I suppose it's not so surprising, is that in this book on sexual magic, there's a whole chapter essentially on the mysteries of the god Set, the Egyptian Set, and the Typhonian tradition. And so even back then, I was kind of thinking a lot of the themes that I kind of went into in even more detail are explored there. So the third chapter is called As Brothers Fight Ye, which is actually a quote from Crowley's channeled text, the Book of the Law. And there's a whole mystery in there about the brothers, or as I suggest, the lovers, and the kind of struggle between them, which is a very, even though it's in a terror, it's a very Egyptian mystery, really, although it occurs in elsewhere. And in fact, in the Crowley tarot deck, the Book of Thoth, the card, the lovers or brothers, Crowley said this was the most obscure and the most difficult of the whole pack. And he also said that this card has particular significance to Thelemites, who are the followers of his particular new religion, and it has been claimed that the twins are the two aspects of Horus which are alluded to in Liber Al. So there are two types of Horus that are kind of manifest there in his particular system. My view at the time that I wrote was that you can call it, they're the brothers and the lovers, or the lovers and the brothers. They're both things together, and the two brothers in question, rather than being two aspects of Horus, they're actually meant to be Horus and Seth. Although even in the Egyptian system, the relationship between the two brothers, Horus and Seth, is complex. They seem to kind of swap places or be the flip side of each other. So the idea in Liber Al of there being two aspects of Horus as two brothers, it's not really contradicted by the Egyptian material, but it's brought out that the two brothers are actually Horus and Seth, really. In the card, you also see Cain and Abel, who are the sons of Lilith and the sons of Eve, apparently in the creation myth. And I suppose in all sorts of mythology, this ancient mystery of the twins and of the two brothers is played out, whether they copy it from each other, obviously, or they're influenced by each other. Now, and the other, I suppose, interesting thing about this that grabbed me at the time is that Horus and Seth, there's a sexual connection there, right, which is sort of unexpected in a way, and incredibly important. Now, it's well known that Aleister Crowley, who's the inspiration for a great number of magicians, really, he had a whole magical theory, or a lot of his magic was a kind of playing out of his own bisexuality, or queerness, really, we'd say now. In a positive sense, and this formula is, he says, very, very important. I mean, in fact, in the Book of the Law, it says the number of magic is 11, and that's another two ones, if you like. That's another reference to the two brothers in its own way. So you've got also, so at the time, this was, I suppose this is one, as I mentioned before, this is one of the very attractive things about Seth, really, as an archetype, is that he's all right. People say he's rebellious. But that means he's also a sexual rebel. He's got a confusion and ambiguity. Ambiguity is a thing which we might say of queerness. He's a queer god, in the best sense of that. And this was something that I found very, very attractive, of course, and it sort of spoke to me. I think it kind of speaks to everybody, really, but it was kind of interesting that the issue of sexual magic and also the finding of a sexual gnosis tradition within Egypt itself, that it would all be tied up with this, that this was a kind of aspect, an important aspect of magic now. I mean, everybody talks about it a lot now, but which is why I said it's quite a glamorous term, because everybody likes to have a view on this. But it's almost that it really found its way back into modern magic because of a personal thing that happened between Crowley and his, we'd say, close friend, but I think you'd have to say his boyfriend, really, Victor Neuburg, who was also his student, a student of Crowley's, and, you know, very, very close, intense relationship was where he was teaching him magic, but at the same time he was having a sexual and emotional relationship with the guy. And Crowley wasn't always, in a way, it's like the Sethian thing, because there's this relationship, this sexual relationship between Horus and Seth, which in some versions, if you look at the original myths in Egypt, it does look, people say, well, it looks quite abusive, really, in some ways. I'll talk about that in a minute, but they've found other versions of this now where the relationship between Horus and Seth is more consensual. I think it was always consensual, but there was certainly an aspect that Seth, being a bit of a kind of rebel and everything, was seducing Horus and leading him astray in some sense. Worse than that. But other versions of the same myth from Egypt itself, there's more of a cooperative thing, and it's obviously an important thing. But it's interesting that Crowley, to me anyway, Crowley and Victor Neuburg were reenacting this drama between two lovers. It just happened that they were two men, but I think it could have been two women. I think it could have been. It's the same implication for everybody. That in the process of their relationship, he kind of discovered that even though magic looks very, very complicated and has this very complicated history in these books and everything that have come down to us from tradition, that make it look really, really hard, that he kind of got to the idea that what really made the magic work, and in a sense was the essential bit, you could dispose of them an awful lot. What really made the magic work was this relationship, this emotional and physical relationship between the two lovers. And that was what really gave it the energy, and the emotional aspect of it. And it's the emotion and the love, I'd say, that is what is giving the power to magic. All the other things are kind of unnecessary. So or they may not, or not as necessary, or they're flexible. It's the emotion, the intention, and the love that really drives the thing along and gets you a long way. And in the end, he kind of developed from this emotional side of it. He developed a whole system, really, which I'm not saying. Obviously, people have kind of redistanced it a little bit, and they say it's not the be-all and end-all, but it's always there. It's always something that people allude to in one way or another, this emotional thing. Of course, this was a little bit of a hidden mystery within Egypt itself. So I'm writing this book on sexual magic, and of course, initially, which is the great aspect of Western magic, if you like, is looking at the tantric tradition, usually from India, and letting these threads come back into modern magic. And in fact, people claim that they reclaim a lot of magical ideas from the Indian tradition, which didn't go through this downer of the Christian era and the religions, which seem to suppress a lot of these ideas, apparently so. So people look to India as a way of reclaiming and refinding the threads. But nobody really expected that to find that within the Egyptian tradition, which our version of it, which is being suppressed really over the 2,000 years, but our version, such as it comes through Greek and Roman sources, in a sense suppressed this emotional sexual side of it, it was left out of the literature, or it was downplayed in some way. And it's really only in the last, since the 1980s really, that this aspect of Egyptian magic has been revealed. I should say it might have been revealed earlier, but for the fact that obviously the first Egyptologists in the Victorian era, they were also a little bit influenced by supposed Christian ethics and by just the general Puritanism, that they kind of tended to downplay it, or where they saw it in the text, because sometimes you just cannot avoid it in the Egyptian material, where the deities are often shown naked and in all sorts of strange postures. Some of the most important deities are shown with erections, and it's a very sexual thing. But even so, when it got too overt, people would say, "Oh, the text is talking nonsense," or "it's not important," or whatever. So that's their way of suppressing it. In fact, in books, people used to, when they early reproductions of Egyptian material, they kind of put little captions over things to hide some of the kind of core details. So it's only since the 1980s that this has really started to come out. But obviously, Crowley taking more of he didn't really know too much of this. He got most of his ideas about sexual magic from the tantric tradition from India. But in his life, he's sort of enacting an Egyptian myth, which is a kind of strange irony. And in the actions that they take, in just the normal things that lovers do when they're relatively uninhibited, and where everything's kind of a little bit beyond the law anyway, so they in a sense they discover things. They discover things in that process that become now a mainstream of magical thought. This is one of the important ways in which you give energy to things. And it's interesting too, as I say, that one of the myths that one finds in Egypt is this important myth between Horus and Seth, and the so-called homosexual incident. As I say, Seth is a rebel, a sexual rebel. He is known for his love of sexuality in general, right? You'd say he was pansexual these days, that he has sex wherever he will. That's his thing. In a way, sometimes this unrestricted sensuality outside of the kind of marriage, if you like, or of the normal conventions within Egyptian society is one of his markers. It's one of the things that marks him out as being sort of a rebel, or of being kind of antisocial in some ways, or of bending the rules too much. But he's certainly famous for it. I mentioned sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and yeah, certainly the alcohol and the overindulgence, the sensuality and the sexuality, and that extends to sexuality in all forms, and that extends to this sexual desire and relationship that he has with his brother or whatever, Horus, his twin, and that's another issue. I should say that a lot of this wasn't really I was in this order, the Typhonian order, or the OTO as it was then, the Typhonian order, and this wasn't really, at this stage in the 1980s, strangely enough, they were almost playing this down. They kind of Grant made this innocent, maybe because of his own temperament, and you know, people have to do what they're into, really. he actually wrote in his book about Aleister Crowley and the Hidden God, that there's a quote: "The ancient draconian mysteries are silent concerning any," what he calls sodomite formula, "except as a perversion of magical practice," which is rather an extraordinary statement to make, to say that the draconian mysteries don't really have kind of a queer or a homosexual, gay, bisexual aspect to it. He's saying it only as some sort of perversion, and it's surprising, really, because that is just completely wrong. That is just wrong, as I say, and nowhere is that more obvious than in the cult of the god Seth, which he's supposed to be naming his tradition after, because Seth is completely sexual in all ways in that tradition, but maybe he just didn't know that, and he kind of reinterpreted a lot of these mysteries, especially the mysteries to do with the 11th degree, as it was being introduced by Crowley as a kind of a gay or queer degree within their degree system. He kind of downplayed that, and he made it into another mystery, which was interesting in its own way. I'm sure those things would be there, but it was a wrong step, I think, and they've had to kind of rein back on that. And you'd say that within I should say as well that, I kind of felt that back then as well when I first read that, which is why that I'm actually quoting that quote ended up in the book as something that I thought was rather strange, that this sort of hypocrisy in a way, because you get it in Crowley as well, that at the same time that they're enjoying this kind of relationship with a man, he's having a relationship, he's kind of saying, well, this is black magic, or no, this is wrong in some way. It's some sort of perversion, and you get that in a lot of things, and they say not only that, it's not really, they try and claim it's not part of the historical tradition of magic, and that just seems wrong in a way. And it seemed wrong to me at the time. I couldn't really understand it. It's probably one of the things that got me into trouble with the OTO in the end, right? Come to think of it, that because my relationship with the OTO didn't end well, but I think it's one of this aspect that I didn't completely accept that point of view is something that put me out of step with someone like Kenneth Grant. Really, I couldn't understand where he was coming from on that. Right, it just seemed a bit backwards in some ways, and also a bit not really what the tradition was teaching. Because the other interesting thing is, if you look at, so since then, as things have moved forward, people have wanted to unearth this tradition of sexual gnosis and of magic, of sexual magic within the Egyptian tradition, having worked out that it is there, and it wouldn't take too much work using the work of scholars, but other things to kind of unearth it again, and not just to unearth it again, but to learn the techniques of it, really, the secrets. People talk about the secrets of ancient magic and of all the rest, and as we'll find, I'll kind of reveal this a few times, more and more of this, that there definitely are secrets. There's a whole tradition and set of techniques and all sorts of stuff that are revealed within the Egyptian text to do with this particular tradition. It's not the only technique, but it's certainly important. You couldn't think of a more sensual sexual culture than the Egyptian one, really. And not surprisingly, this was sexuality was thought of within the Egyptian culture as something that brought you closer to God, or the divine realm in one way, which is not something that I remember reading within the Egyptology books at the time, but since then it's starting to emerge that this is true. And there are all sorts of secrets and stuff encoded within the Typhonian tradition. This is the weird thing, that the Typhonian tradition, because of this relationship that takes place between Horus and Seth, in which obviously a lot of the myth is in Egypt is about this interplay between them, not just a sexual thing, but this rivalry in a way. And it's quite complicated business of how this came about, and at some point I'll kind of show the stages in that as it comes up, because it's a complicated, lots of interesting things we can say about that. But certainly in their relationship, where at some point where they're just basically relaxing together as two gods do, as two entities do, of an evening, and they're drinking and whatever, and Seth kind of propositions Horus, who what's called the oldest chat-up line, gay chat-up line in recorded history, which is, probably not very flattering. That Seth makes a comment about, oh, what a nice ass Horus has got, not to put too fine a point of it. He's good. You're a good-looking guy, he says to him, and I kind of fancy you, and hopefully you fancy me. And this is in the mythology, and so they kind of get it on, and one way or another in the process. And as I say, it could be two men, it can also be women, it can be anybody. But in the process of the sexual encounter in Egypt, in the Egyptian tradition, the stages they go through, the things that they do, obviously they're about pleasure, but they're also about magic. They're about the manipulation of magic. And on a crude level, if one's interested in gay witchcraft or grey magic or whatever, then there are many, many secrets encoded in just the account of their working together, of having sex together, basically. All of the secrets, because they have sex in an unusual way, as they set. Horus doesn't want to be penetrated, if you like, and Seth wants to do that, and so they kind of come to some sort of compromise, one way or another. And there's all sorts of interesting side stories about how Horus is advised, trained, how the sort of sexual advice that they get from their parents, if you like, or from their contemporaries on how to all of this is amazing, really, is encountered in the text one way or another. So then the way they have sex, and then when they have the orgasm, what they do with the substances, and there's the whole story about that, which we can maybe go into at another time, without wanting to reveal too much of the secrets in one go, if you like. The upshot of it is that the god Seth ends up pregnant, which, as I say, there's nothing new, right, in mythology. He's hoping to get Horus pregnant, really, I suppose. Now that might sound kind of weird, but again, in terms of Tantra as well, and so this notion of gods, male gods or whatever, androgynes becoming pregnant, becoming creative, which is usually thought of as a female motif, is played out in all sorts of cultures that work with this sort of stuff. The creation of the magical child is what we're talking about. This notion, which is so important in magic, the creation of the magical child. So it's obviously Seth, although he's nominally supposed to be male, like a lot of the Egyptian deities, they're able to create to be both. There's a sort of androgynous quality to almost all of the Egyptian deities, which is a very, very important thing for us to kind of get our heads around, and is really revealed within the Typhonian tradition. This is quite an important aspect of magic, and eventually Seth, although he didn't intend it, and say there's all sorts of wonderful details there, he becomes pregnant and he gives birth to the god Thoth, or Tahuti in Egyptian tradition, who is a moon god, as Horus and Seth are also, in some instances, moon gods. So we're into the realm of lunar magic as well, which is very, very suggestive. Very, very important within the Typhonian and Egyptian tradition. They give birth to Thoth, who is a moon god, and very, very important within the Thelemic tradition as well, has to be said. The whole tarot deck that we started off talking about is named after Thoth. They give birth to Thoth, who in some senses is the god of magic as well. He's a personification of magic. He really is the magical child. He's an awful lot of other things, but he certainly is the magical child. He's the god of magic. In the Egyptian tradition, any utterance of the god Thoth or Tahuti is itself but in itself an act of magic. Is a magical spell. The sayings, the speech or words of Thoth are magic. So he's the personification of magic. It's interesting that his birth is, as is common, he's kind of called out. A magical ritual enables Seth to give birth, and at first the moon appears in his forehead as a kind of third eye, and this notion of the third eye and the secret moon, the hidden moon that manifests through the body and out through the head. I mean, these are ideas that you could definitely find within the tantric tradition within India, if you know where to look and you know the sources quite well. It's actually something that I also ended up exploring in some detail, and I'll talk about that at some later date. So this is where I was at that point, and this is, let's say, 1980s. My task was to form some sort of little groove, to introduce other people to magic at the time. It's one of the things you're supposed to do, and this was some of the work I was doing. And we studied. We began the early study of from people who came with new stuff. They introduced us to what became known as the Greek magical papyri, or the Egyptian magical papyri, really, and we started studying those, which had already been part of the Typhonian tradition and part of the Crowley tradition, and even from the Golden Dawn days. And that's become a big thing now. And even at this early stage in the explorations, that I began, I suppose, to channel Seth in a way, for want of a better word, or to kind of try and work out what it was about, and to state then, as I say, Seth, you're a mystery to me. This is a quote from the book. Then just an impression or a glimpse of something, of what's all being destroyed. Only a few traces or tracks remain. So how is your worship done? And are we ever to know that? I think of you prowling in the depths of the desert, in the wasteland. Perhaps you're too frightening for us. Your seal flashing with power, the white edges of which are now clear. The black fades into half-formed images. Seth, Lord of Confusion, ambiguous one, you're also the totem of the new eon. Merry Seth, beloved Seth, is our age really free? And are we ready for your return? So this is where I was, wondering why this image, why this particular deity I'd encountered, and it was much more complicated and important than I realised. It had a personal connection. It was also very personal. It was very much about the emotions and things that are quite central to people's lives. And as I said, it was already beginning to emerge. And I was with a group of people, and we were exploring this stuff of sexual rebellion, if you like, or emotional rebellion, of kind of rejecting things. It was difficult, but in the group, it was definitely hit upon something. The information we had thus far was partial. There is some good information coming from via Greek and classical sources and via theosophy and all the rest, but from the group of people that we drew together who were also cold to this mystery at the time in one way or another, people came who were able to add more information, if you like, or point us to something that would really open the door. And the opening of the door to the mysteries of Seth and the companions of Seth is something I'm going to talk about next time. So thank you for listening. If you want to follow up a little bit, the book Sexual Magick, authored by Kate Onshall, is still available. There's probably still got lots of very interesting information, but it was the beginning, and it opens the door and introduces some of the key concepts that get really, really expanded over time. So thank you for that, and stay well. The plague of the earth shall not have you, and Senebti.